without notes and kids just zone out. Okay, well, that's on YouTube. They're going to feel a little strange. Section 1.2. I said what we're going to start doing. Biomes are big. We're going to start zooming in. So as a matter of fact, Allison, who's going to put her phone away for the remainder of the lesson, face down and out of her... There you go. Biomes contain many types of ecosystems, which already sort of tells you what an ecosystem is. It's a subpart of a biome. We can be more specifics. So they're much smaller scale than biomes. But there's a wide range. They can be as small as a tide pool the size of my desk or a rotting log. Or they can be as large as a mountain range. It all depends, Allison, on how interrelated the subcomponents of the ecosystem are. And it all depends, Julie, on how you decide to classify and categorize stuff. Here's the basic definition, which is why I said basically. So basically, it's all of the biotic components, plants, animals, microorganisms, the living stuff. And what was the opposite of biotic? Do you remember the other word? Abiotic. Components, oxygen, water, nutrients, light, soil type, that interact with each other more or less directly. That's not a great definition. Put your pencils down. Within ecosystems, we have habitats, also a word that you're hopefully familiar with. What are habitats? A place in which an organism lives. Some abiotic interactions, some non-living interactions within ecosystems. Well, first thing we have are, oh, my pen was doing so well and now it just stopped again. I just had the tech guy. Nutrients. Nutrients, there's an N there. These are chemicals that are required for plant and animal growth. Two of the very big ones, as anybody who does gardening knows: nitrogen and phosphorus. In fact, one of the main reasons that the Earth can now hold around 8 billion people was at the turn of the last century, scientists figured out how to pull nitrogen from the air and turn it into fertilizer. Up until then, the main source of nitrogen was waste products from living things, and you can use your imagination and figure out what we mean. But manure was the best source of nitrogen, but there was a limited amount of that. As soon as we found out how to create chemical fertilizers, agriculture took way off. What else? Photosynthesis. What's photosynthesis? I missed an N. Photosynthesis. Thank you. Candy for you later, Alex. Photosynthesis. I don't know. Apparently I have a thing against N's. It's a chemical reaction that converts what type of energy into what type of energy. What's the fancy word for sun? Begins with the letter S, but has two syllables. Okay, solar energy. Okay, into chemical energy, usually simple sugars. This is why, Matt, you'll hear us say all life comes from the sun, because there's not a single living creature on Earth, as far as I know, that doesn't in some way get its energy from the sun. Well, I don't photosynthesize. No, but you eat things that photosynthesize, or you eat things that photosynthesize. All of our life energy eventually comes from the sun. What do you think the amount of photosynthesis depends on? How much what the ecosystem receives? Yeah? Matthew asked, and I was worried Matthew would ask that. Those use a different synthesis procedure. You are correct. We have found that in by those thermal vents, there are some weird creatures that don't follow this. So I should have said almost every living thing. Did I say every living thing, or did I say almost every living thing? Good catch. By the way, the amount of photosynthesis depends on the amount of what? Sunlight the ecosystem receives. So now you can start thinking to yourself, what would affect the amount of sunlight? Certainly your latitude, closer to the equator, you get more sunlight year round. Oh, are there more plants down there? Yeah! Okay. Higher up on mountain, in rainy area, you can start to really think about what would affect how much sunlight you get. So we have nutrients, we have photosynthesis, and the third big one is soil. It's an abiotic component, a non-living component. Soil provides the nutrients for plants and supports many species of small organisms. Deserts don't support many plants. Dry soil with very few nutrients. One of the reasons the lower mainland does so well for agriculture, we have very good soil. Our soil, if you plant something almost anywhere between Vancouver and Hope, it'll grow. The soil is pretty much good almost everywhere. That's not the case in all places of the world. Put a little star there, we'll come back to that. Actually, you know what? Put your pencils down. What about some biotic interactions, some living interactions? So here again is going to be some more terminology, and these are going to be some of the terms that you heard in the video that we watched a few minutes ago. So a species is a group of closely related organisms that can reproduce with each other. What word do you remember from the video did we use for all the members of a particular species within an ecosystem? It began with the letter P. Population. What about if we were looking at populations from more than one species? What did we call all of the populations of different species that interacted? Community. As a picture, the biosphere is made up of ecosystems, which are made up of communities, which are made up of populations, which are made up of little individual animals or bugs or plants. Like I said at the beginning of this, Matt, we're going to zoom in. Is that okay? Turn the page for you guys. Or is it? Turn the page for you guys? Okay. So what's the order of biotic interactions from smallest to largest? We start with one organism, one squirrel. What do you call all the squirrels living in an area from the same species? Population. What do you call all the different living species in one area? Community. And then all of those, the living and non-living components become an ecosystem. And that's why the definition of ecosystem is sort of vague. Really, you kind of got to start at the bottom, work your way up. But if they're not interacting directly, then they're really not part of the same ecosystem. It wouldn't make sense to say that. Another neat word is the word niche, or niche. I pronounce it niche. This is the way in which an organism contributes to and fits into its environment. Ideally, for a healthy ecosystem, every organism has its own little niche that it fits into, and that way, species A doesn't eat the same food as species B, which doesn't eat the same food as species C, which doesn't live in the same area as species A. They all have their own little niches that they fit into. An unhealthy ecosystem, that ain't happening, and then you're going to have competition and ugliness. So, what's a niche? All the physical, chemical, and biological interactions required for a species to, here are the two key things all life wants to do. First, life wants to survive, and secondly, it wants to reproduce and pass on its genes. How can individuals, whether you're looking at an individual organism, a specific animal, or groups of individuals, if you're looking at an individual species, how can individuals in an ecosystem interact with each other? We have a fancy word for this. This is sort of like if you've watched The Lion King, Little Simba and the Great Circle of Life. We call it symbiosis. This refers to the interactions between members of two different species that live together in, well, not necessarily the same area, live together in close association, either side by side or in the same area. Difference. Thank you. Sorry, I'm always looking about 3 lines ahead in my notes, and you're noticing I'm having to refer to my notes a lot more. Unlike physics and chemistry, I can't quite do this from my head. There are, Matt, you are correct, 3 main types of symbiosis. There are others. 3 main types. Classic provincial exam question. So this is going to be terms that you're going to need to memorize. Thanks, Jess. Can you put it face down in the appropriate block? Pause for 1 sec. So what are the 3 types? I'll give you the 3 words, and then we'll look at what each one of them means. So the first one is commensalism. Commensalism. Common, and then S-A-L-I-S-M. The second one is mutualism. And the third one is parasitism. Hopefully you know enough of vocabulary to say, I think the third one is the least pleasant. Okay? Yeah, it's from parasites. Okay? Commensalism and mutualism. So we'll talk about now what each one of these means. Commensalism, mutualism, and parasitism. The one I have a tough time remembering is commensalism. Yes, the word commensurate is part of my vocabulary, but I don't use it very often. I do use the word mutual in my vocabulary fairly often, and I teach high school kids, so believe me, I use the word never mind. Okay. Commensalism. One species benefits while the other is neither harmed nor helped. Neutral. And a great example is the barnacles on a whale. The barnacles that grow on a whale don't harm or help the whale, but it's very, very helpful for the barnacles because they get free transportation all over the ocean. Okay. There's more examples, I think, in your textbook and in the homework. So if something is if something is showing commensalism, you're saying, oh, one party is getting an advantage, the other party, meh, not bad, not good, meh. Wrapping your brain around that, you can probably guess what mutualism means. It's a situation where both parties what? Yeah, both parties benefit. In fact, in most cases, the organisms could not survive without each other. Flowers rely on birds and bees to pollinate them, and the birds and the bees need the nectar for food. If either of those vanishes, the other species is in trouble. One very cool one, lichen, which grows on lots of trees in BCs, it turns out is actually a combination of two different species, algae and moss, and they come together and help each other out. I think the moss processes, the nutrients from the ground, and I think the algae processes the photosynthesis, and I think they share them back and forth. If one dies, the other one can't feed itself any longer. I wrote down here some other cool examples on page 41. Put your pencils down. Parasitism. What do you think? One species blank while the other is blank. If commensalism is one species benefits while the other is neither harm nor hurt. If mutualism is both species benefit, I'll give you a hint. One species, pardon me? One species benefits while the other is harmed. Okay. Parasites are almost always smaller and more numerous than the hosts. And ideally, usually, the host is usually not killed, but it's usually weakened. The Ebola virus is an example of a virus that if it wasn't so deadly, it would be far more worrisome. The fact that it's so deadly, it tends to kill its hosts before the hosts have a chance to infect other people, which is why you get an outbreak every so often in the news, but it kind of just seems to die out. It's too deadly. So it's an example of an overly aggressive parasite, where the flu virus, or the common cold, those have been around for centuries and centuries and thousands of years. Why? You get sick, you get better, but they get to reproduce through your system and pass on to other stuff. There are over, yep.
If that way parasites can infect humans, then why we spray our fruits and stuff with parasites?
We don't spray our fruits with parasites. Pesticides. It's a different word. Okay? Good question, though. Having said that, you've led to a problem. The fact that we use so much pesticides, what's happening is all the weak parasites and bugs die off, and the only ones that survive to reproduce are the ones that were able to survive the pesticides, and lo and behold, after a decade or so, they can all survive the pesticides, and we're constantly cycling through. Certainly, we overused penicillin. When penicillin was first invented in the 1940s, 1930s, it was just seen as a wonder drug. We gave it to everything, and all we did is we bred superviruses, not knowing that we were doing that. And so now, if you go to your doctors, they're far. When I was in elementary school, if I had a cough, my doctor would prescribe penicillin. I'd swallow some pills. Now, unless you're really sick, your doctor is going to say to you, tough it out. Because we've clued in, we have to reserve them for emergencies. The one BC has been dealing with for a decade or so, the mountain pine beetle. It's devastating our pine forests. We have a cabin growing up near 100 Mile House. We sold it when I was about 20, but I remember spending my childhood there. I went and visited it a couple of years ago, and it was horrible. All the trees were dead. I remember it all being green and forests, and we're on, like, every tree was red and dead. Pardon me? In that area, but this is actually on the other side of the mountain. Yeah. Just the pine beetle had come through and killed everything. Okay? So, there's something called, kind of disgusting, but pretty cool too, brood parasitism. This is where one species of birds lays its eggs in another species of birds' nests. So cuckoo birds are very, very famous for this. Cuckoos will find a nest where the birds have just laid an egg. They'll knock some of the other eggs out. They'll lay their egg, and their egg will hatch first, which means their egg gets fed first. So by the time the other eggs hatch, their little baby is strong enough to kill the other babies and just demand all the food from the mama. And the mama of this new species raises this bird as its own, not knowing that it's raising an intruder. Smart, creepy, and ew. So, how about let's use an M for mutualism, a C for commensalism, a P for parasitism. The top middle picture, do you think that's mutualism, commensalism, or parasitism? Both benefiting. What about the left picture where one person cooked the dinner and both are eating? One person gets a benefit, the other person neither helped nor harmed. And here is parasitism. One person's taking the food from the other person after eating their own food too. Competition. Another new word. Competition is the...
my apologies for this interruption, everyone. At this time, this is a...
Competition among species. It's defined as the harmful interaction between two or more organisms. Usually it means they both want the same thing and there ain't enough to go around. You may have heard it pronounced as survival of the fittest. That's not really what that means, but yeah, that's kind of what's implied by that. No, only the strong will survive. So this can occur when two organisms have to compete for the same resource, food, living space, mates, safety, whatever, in the same area at the same, take a guess, time. And what competition tends to do then, it limits the size that both populations can achieve. It can limit the size of a population. Predation, predator. This is a relationship in which one organism eats some or all of another organism. What do we call the organism that does the eating? Predator? What do we call the ET? The prey. Spelled with an E. Okay? There's a whole branch of biology looking at predator and prey interactions. So predatory animals have some type of adaptations that make them good predators, good hunters, good eaters, good whatever. And usually prey animals... Adaptations, thank you. Adaptations. Candy for you too. And prey animals have adaptations that keep them from being eaten. The classic example are foxes and rabbits. The rabbits' adaptation, they're fast and they breed fast so that their species won't get wiped out. That makes them survive, more likely to survive. What has the fox adapted to become a good predator? Teeth. I mean, and fairly quick and all that stuff too. And ideally, Conlon, what you have is a good balance. Ideally, what you have is, there are these predator and prey graphs. Let me show you a sim. Let me pause the video. So here's an example of a standard predator-prey graph. Which species is the predator? The lynx or the rabbit? A lynx is like a bobcat. Another word for a bobcat. Which species is the prey? Rabbit. And the key idea, what do you notice happens shortly after the rabbit population peaks? Lynx population increases. Why? More food food. Really, what's happening is weaker lynx animals, Julia, wake up, kiddo, lousier hunters that normally would have died off, there's actually enough rabbits for them to catch a rabbit too. This is the whole competition thing that we talked about. Because all the lynxes are competing for the same food source as well. What do you notice happens shortly after the lynx population peaks? Population decreases. Why? They're getting eaten. A healthy or a stable ecosystem has these bouncing back and forth in a fairly reasonable range, so you don't have these wild swings back and forth. Sadly, we are one of the causes of some of the largest wild swings in these ecosystems. We are good at making things extinct. We are the best hunter, the best predator that the world has ever seen. So here's another lovely little comparison. A couple more cool things. Does anybody know, what do you call it when one prey tries to adapt or look like the form of another prey that's more dangerous? That's the non-biology term. So I'm going to start typing, see if you can figure out the word. It's called mimicry. That's the fancy biology term. Okay? And anybody who lives in the eastern U.S. and goes hiking knows the difference between a coral snake and a scarlet king snake. Coral snake will kill you if it bites you, certainly make you very sick. They're very venomous. Scarlet king snake. And in fact, there's a rhyme. What's the rhyme? Pardon me? Probably Eastern Canada. Okay. Oh, are we trying to give Courtney a complex? There's some kind of a rhyme. I think it's
red, black, and yellow will kill a fellow or something.
There it is. Red, black, and yellow. Red, black, yellow, kill a fellow? I don't think that's it, because red, black, yellow won't kill a fellow. Something like that. There's a rhyme. We don't care. Why? Because they haven't made it over the Rocky Mountains. They don't live in our area. They don't like our climate. Oh, they don't like our ecosystem. One you see all the time, though, we see both monarch butterflies and viceroy butterflies as well. Monarch butterflies, birds have learned taste foul. In fact, they'll make them throw up. If a bird eats a monarch, the first time they eat a monarch, they vomit and they clue in, I'm not eating that again. The viceroy looks almost identical. Brilliant mimicry. Birds don't eat viceroys either, even though, not that I've tried, I imagine viceroys taste fine. Okay. I was going to show you, I showed you the David Gallo video already where you looked at the mimicry of the octopus that very amazingly disguised itself like a piece of coral. At the very end, you swore you were looking at a piece of underwater weed, and holy smokes, that was an octopus. You guys remember that one? If you were away, I'll show you that one again. It says, read page 48 together. Okay.